Welcome back, everyone. We're taking another deep dive into the impactful Vatican II documents. And this time, we're tackling Gaudium et Spes, Joy and Hope.
That's right.
This one's a bit different than our explorations of Lumen Gentium, De Verbum, and Sacrosanctum Concilium,
Yeah.
because it focuses on the Church engaging with the modern world.
Exactly. With those first three documents, we saw the Church kind of looking inward, right? Examining its own identity, scriptural interpretation, and liturgy. Gaudium et Spes takes those foundations and turns outward, looking at how the Church interacts with all the complexities and challenges of the modern world.
So it's like the Church stepping out into the public square and saying, okay, how do we live out our faith in this rapidly changing world?
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
tackling the big questions about the human person, the human community, and the things we are all struggling with as humans in the world.
And keep in mind, this was the 1960s. We're talking about the Cold War, the space race, massive social upheavals, and technological advancements that were really transforming society. Gaudium et Spes doesn't shy away from the anxieties of that era. It actually addresses them head on. In fact, there's even a whole section on atheism and the rise of what they called a new humanism that questioned the very need for God.
Wow, it's like they had a crystal ball and saw what was coming.
Right.
But what strikes me is how relevant all these issues still are today, right?
Absolutely.
We're still grappling with many of the same challenges, from technological disruption to social divisions and so on.
It's almost eerie, right? But that's what makes Gaudium et Spes so fascinating. I think it speaks to those enduring questions of the human condition. And what's even more interesting is how it does it. Right from the preface, Gaudium et Spes directly addresses the reader, emphasizing this kind of shared experience of joys and anxieties between the Church and all of humanity. It sets a tone of solidarity, not separation.
It's like the Church is saying, we're in this together, which is really powerful.
Absolutely.
And then the document lays out this ambitious goal to shed light on the mystery of the human person and offer solutions to the problems of our time. That's a pretty tall order.
It is. And it starts by delving into the dignity of the human person. Gaudium et Spes presents this powerful vision of every human being, as created in the image of God, endowed with inherent dignity. It emphasizes the unity of body and soul, the role of intellect and will, conscience and freedom.
It reminds us that each person is unique and precious. And it's not just some abstract theological concept. This has real-world implications.
Right.
Like if every person has inherent dignity, how does that change the way we treat each other? How does it affect our approach to social justice issues?
Exactly. That emphasis on human dignity runs through the entire document. It informs how Gaudium et Spes approaches issues like poverty, discrimination, and the rights of women. It challenges us to see each person not as a problem to be solved, but as a brother or sister to be loved and respected.
Okay, so the Church is planting its flag firmly on the side of human dignity. But then we come to this section on atheism, and I have to admit, I was surprised by how the document handles it.
What stood out to you?
Well, it wasn't just condemnation. They actually try to understand the reasons behind atheism. They acknowledge different forms of atheism and even point to the ways that believers themselves might contribute to people rejecting faith.
Yes. Gaudium et Spes acknowledges that sometimes, the Church's own actions or the behavior of individual Christians can create obstacles to faith. It even suggests that some forms of atheism are a valid critique of injustice or suffering in the world.
I found that incredibly insightful. It's like they're saying, hey, we need to look in the mirror and see if we're part of the problem. It's a call to self-reflection and to a more authentic lived faith.
And it challenges us to consider how we might be contributing to the very things we're critiquing. It's easy to point fingers, but Gaudium et Spes calls for a more nuanced and self-critical approach. It's about understanding the complexities of the modern world and engaging in genuine dialogue with those who hold different views.
So not just preaching at people, but actually listening and trying to understand their perspectives.
Precisely. It's about recognizing the shared humanity that binds us together, even when we disagree on matters of faith.
This seems like a pretty radical shift for the Church at that time. I wonder how this emphasis on dialogue and understanding played out in the years after Vatican II.
That's a great question, and one that we should definitely explore further as we delve deeper into Gaudium et Spes.
Okay, well, I'm hooked. Let's keep going, because I'm already seeing how this document was so groundbreaking.
Absolutely. And what we've covered so far is just the tip of the iceberg. Next, we'll dive into what Gaudium et Spes has to say about the community of mankind, and that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay, I'm ready.
So picking up where we left off, let's explore how Gaudium et Spes tackles this concept of the community of mankind, right? What really struck me about this section is how the document emphasizes the interconnectedness of humanity. It's not just about individual salvation, it's about recognizing our shared responsibility for each other and for the world.
That's a really interesting point. So it's moving beyond that me and Jesus mentality and calling for a more outward-focused approach to faith.
Exactly, yeah. And it does this by kind of weaving together several key threads: the call to brotherhood and love of neighbor, the importance of social justice, and the need for both individuals and institutions to work towards the common good.
You know, when you put it that way, it sounds a lot like the social teaching of the church. Yeah. But reading Gaudium et Spes, it feels so fresh, so relevant to today's world.
It is, and it's no coincidence. Many scholars see Gaudium et Spes as kind of a foundational document for modern Catholic social teaching. It lays the groundwork for how the church engages with issues like poverty, economic inequality, discrimination, and the rights of marginalized groups.
And those are issues that haven't gone away. In fact, in many ways, they've become even more pressing in recent years. So what specific examples does Gaudium et Spes give about how we're supposed to live this out? How are we supposed to act?
Well, it challenges us to think beyond charity and to work for systemic change. It calls for a just distribution of goods, emphasizing the right of all people to a dignified life.
So not just handouts, but actually addressing the root causes of poverty and inequality.
Right. It's about creating structures that promote justice and opportunity for everyone. And it's not just about government programs. It's about how we live our lives, how we spend our money, how we treat those who are less fortunate than ourselves.
So it's a call to personal responsibility and social action.
Absolutely. It reminds us that we're all interconnected. The choices we make, the way we live, has an impact on others, both near and far.
That reminds me of something else that struck me in this section. Gaudium et Spes specifically mentions the rights of women. That felt pretty progressive for the 1960s. What exactly does it say?
It affirms the equal dignity of women and calls for their full participation in society. It condemns discrimination against women and acknowledges their unique contributions to family, community, and the world.
It definitely feels like the church was ahead of the curve on that one. I wonder how those ideas were received at the time and how they've influenced the church's stance on women's issues in the decades since.
That's a great question, and one that deserves further exploration. It's clear that Gaudium et Spes opened up a conversation about the role of women in the church and in society that continues to this day.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about another aspect of Gaudium et Spes that I found really surprising. The document's view of human progress, especially in science and technology.
Oh, yes. It's so easy to assume that the church would be wary of progress, maybe even see it as a threat to faith. But Gaudium et Spes actually embraces it.
Yeah, I was blown away by that. It actually celebrates human progress, seeing it as in harmony with God's will. It even uses this phrase, rightful autonomy of earthly affairs, which I found fascinating. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it's acknowledging that God created the world with its own laws and order, and it's up to us to kind of discover and use those laws responsibly. We're not puppets on a string. We're co-creators with God, called to participate in the ongoing work of creation.
It's not about rejecting science or technology, but integrating them into our understanding of God's plan.
Exactly. It's about seeing the good in human ingenuity, the possibilities of science and technology for the betterment of humanity. But it also comes with a caution. We have to make sure our pursuits align with the common good, that they respect the dignity of all creation. It's about using our knowledge and power responsibly.
So it's not a blank check for scientific advancement. There are ethical considerations.
Absolutely. Gaudium et Spes recognizes that human progress can be a double-edged sword. It can lead to great advancements, but it can also be used for destructive purposes.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like with any powerful tool, it depends on whose hands it's in and how it's used. But this whole idea of the church celebrating human progress, I wonder how well that's played out in practice. Have we really embraced the possibilities of science and technology in a way that reflects Gaudium et Spes?
That's a big question, and I think the answer is complex. There have been times when the church has been at the forefront of scientific discovery and innovation, and there have been times when it's been more hesitant or even resistant to change. It's an ongoing conversation, and one that we need to continue having.
All right, so maybe we haven't always gotten it right, but at least Gaudium et Spes lays out a pretty clear vision of how faith and science can coexist and even complement each other. Now, I know there's a whole section coming up on marriage and family life. This was the 1960s, a time of huge social change, especially in those areas. I'm really curious to see how Gaudium et Spes addresses these topics.
Oh, yes. This is where things get really interesting and maybe even a bit controversial. So buckle up. We're about to delve into one of the most hotly debated sections of Gaudium et Spes.
Okay, I'm ready for it. All right, so we're finally diving into this section on marriage and family life. And I have to admit, I'm a bit apprehensive. We've seen how Gaudium et Spes embraces this whole idea of dialogue and engagement with the modern world. But marriage and family are such, core tenets of the Church's teachings. How did the document handle the changing social landscape of the 1960s, especially around these issues?
Well, it starts by affirming the sacredness of marriage, as a partnership of life and love ordained for the procreation and education of children. That's a very traditional view, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the foundation of the Church's understanding of marriage. But this was the era of the sexual revolution, changing gender roles and increasing acceptance of divorce. Did Gaudium et Spes acknowledge any of these shifts? Did it see what was happening around it?
Oh, it did. Yeah, it acknowledges the challenges that families were facing in a rapidly changing world. Things like economic pressures, social upheaval, and the growing influence of secularism.
So it wasn't just ignoring the realities of the time.
Not at all. Gaudium et Spes recognizes that the lived experience of marriage and family life was becoming more complex. But while it acknowledges the challenges, it firmly upholds the indissolubility of marriage and rejects practices like abortion and artificial contraception.
Okay, so that's where the tension comes in, right? Those are areas where the Church's teachings have often been met with, resistance, even rejection, both within and outside the Church. How does Gaudium et Spes try to bridge that gap?
It focuses on the beauty and dignity of marriage and family life. It presents this vision of the family as the foundation of society, the domestic church, where faith is nurtured and passed on to future generations. It calls for a deeper understanding of the joys and challenges of family life and for a commitment to supporting families in all their forms.
So while upholding those traditional teachings, it's also recognizing the need for pastoral sensitivity and support for families who are struggling with these complex issues.
Exactly. It's about meeting people where they are, accompanying them on their journey, and offering guidance and support rooted in love and compassion. It's not about condemning or judging, but about helping families live out their vocation to love and holiness in the midst of real-world challenges.
Okay, that makes sense. It aligns with that overarching theme of dialogue and engagement that we've been seeing throughout Gaudium et Spes. It's about recognizing that the Church doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It has to grapple with the messiness of human life and find ways to bring the gospel message of hope and healing to those who are hurting.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got it. And that brings us to another crucial theme in Gaudium et Spes, this urgent need for peace in a world that's often marked by conflict and violence. This section feels especially relevant today, with all the wars and unrest happening around the globe.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to see how much of what Gaudium et Spes warns against is still happening. So what does it say about how we can build a more peaceful world? Where do we even begin?
Well, it starts by condemning the arms race and calling for disarmament. It urges nations to work together for a just and peaceful world order, one that prioritizes diplomacy and cooperation over military might. It also promotes international cooperation to address global challenges like poverty, hunger, and development.
So it's about shifting our priorities from weapons and warfare to human needs and well-being.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that true peace isn't just the absence of war. It's the presence of justice, equality, and opportunity for all. It's about building a world where everyone can flourish and live in dignity.
That sounds beautiful, but also incredibly challenging. How does Gaudium et Spes suggest we even begin to tackle these huge systemic issues?
It calls for a conversion of hearts. It reminds us that peace begins with each of us, in our everyday interactions and the choices we make and the way we treat others. It's about cultivating a spirit of peacemaking in our own lives and then letting that ripple outward into our families, our communities, and the world.
So it's not just about signing treaties or passing laws, it's about transforming our own hearts and minds.
Exactly. It's about rooting out the seeds of violence and hatred that can, so easily take root within us and replacing them with seeds of love, compassion, and understanding. It's a lifelong process, and it's not always easy. But Gaudium et Spes offers hope. It reminds us that we're not alone in this journey. We have the support of the Church, the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and the companionship of fellow believers.
Throughout this whole deep dive into Gaudium et Spes, I've been struck by the document's emphasis on action. It's not just about studying theologies or debating doctrine. It's about living out our faith in the real world, engaging with its complexities, and working to make it a more just, compassionate, and peaceful place.
It's a call to discipleship, to be the hands and feet of Christ in the world. And it's a call that's just as relevant today as it was back in 1965.
So where does that leave us?
Yeah.
What are we supposed to do with all these insights and challenges that Gaudium at Spes has laid out for us?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think the answer is different for each of us. But, I believe Gaudium et Spes invites us to engage in a process of discernment, to prayerfully reflect on its teachings, to examine our own lives and choices, and to ask ourselves how we can respond to its call to action.
So it's not about giving us a set of rules or a checklist to follow. It's about inspiring us to live out our faith in a way that's both authentic and relevant to the challenges of our time.
Precisely. It's about empowering us to be creative, courageous, and compassionate disciples of Christ in the midst of a complex and ever-changing world.
Wow, what a powerful message. Thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive into Gaudium et Spes. It's been a really eye-opening experience.
It's been my pleasure. I hope this deep dive has sparked your own curiosity to explore the document further and to discern how its teachings can inform your own life and faith journey.
Absolutely. And to all of our listeners out there, we encourage you to do the same. Read Gaudium et Spes for yourselves, wrestle with its ideas, and see how it speaks to your own experiences and hopes for the future.
Yeah, and let's continue this conversation together. To share your thoughts, your questions, your struggles, and your inspirations. Because, as Gaudium et Spes reminds us, we're all in this together, striving to build a world where joy and hope can truly flourish.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deeper into the mysteries of our faith.